Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we deepen our exploration into the domain of apology that we set forth as our meta theme as we began the year 2023, as the world stands on the precipice of self-destruction through human activity. It's extraordinary to reflect that there's no alien invasion of the planet. There's nobody forcing humanity to act as it is. But if you look around the world, we are literally cannibalizing each other and cannibalizing the ecosystem with an alacrity and a refusal to stop that has brought the life process to the brink of extinction for over 1 million species, including now the human species. If you think about it, most of this damage is being done by men. That's the sad fact of our predicament. I read the other day that in 2022 alone, there were 648 mass shootings in the United States. That's over 2 a day. A mass shooting is defined as an event using guns where at least 4 people are killed or injured. Every single one of those 648 shootings was done by a man, usually a young man. And of course, as we all know, that wasn't limited to the United States, but other countries in Europe and around the world have had shootings, almost always by young men. The differences between men and women are profound. And so as we evolve this conversation at Humanity Rising about some of the intricacies of human consciousness at this time and why we all need to apologize, either asking for apologies, giving apologies, understanding that all of us need to apologize to our own bodies for how we treat our own bodies and how we treat the earth. We also want to explore this phenomenon of the male of the species Homo sapiens and the challenges that we men, I'm a North American white male that has probably wreaked more havoc on the planet over the last 500 years than any males have done, certainly in the world during that time. But colonialism and capitalism and the rapacious exploitation of the environment has been done by men is an extraordinary fact to contemplate. So we're just going to begin today with that exploration, and we'll be talking more about this as one of the strands that we want to consider as deeply as we can here on Humanity Rising. As world events unfold, the most urgent of which, as you all know, is Ukraine. Again, men fighting each other, brandishing nuclear weapons. For what? But doing so in a way that could bring nuclear war to Europe and the devastation at unimaginable levels to our world. Before we dive in with one of the leading specialists on men of our time, let us just pause, as we always do as we begin our sessions, because in the midst of everything that's happening, we can breathe together. We can share our hearts. We can commune together, knowing that our job here at Humanity Rising is to enable humanity to rise. So as we deal with challenges, every time we see these challenges as opportunities. And that's what we'd like to do with the challenge of being a man, is what is the opportunity for growth and development and abundance given the crisis that men have brought upon the world. You'll hear the sound of a bell. When you hear the sound of the bell in just a moment, just breathe in just very slowly, and then you'll hear the sound of another bell, and just exhale slowly. We're going to take 10 breaths together and breathe as one. Thank you, everyone. We're not hearing any sound, Raji.
Give me 1 second, please.
Or maybe if it's a challenge, then we can just skip it for today. Thank you, everyone. I know we had some technical challenges. Georg is not here today. Raji's been handling the technology, and he's doing it from Sri Lanka. And sometimes it's a long way from Sri Lanka, technically speaking. So thank you for your patience. I'd like to now introduce someone who I've gotten to know over the last year, who's become a friend and colleague, and with whom we're beginning to collaborate on developing at Ubiquity University a whole program on male health and well-being. Because given what I said in the introduction, the issue of how we understand the male psyche, the male body, and why there's this proclivity among men to do such pervasive violence against women, against the earth, against each other through war and devastation, is perhaps the greatest issue of our time. And so we are going to begin that exploration today with a gentleman named Jed Diamond, who's been one of the foremost leaders in the men's movement for over 50 years, because it was over 50 years ago that he founded the organization MenAlive. He's written 17 books, including a number of international bestsellers. I can remember reading Male Menopause number of years ago, and the Irritable Male Syndrome. And now Jed is just about ready to publish his new book called The Moonshot, which is really looking at how men can improve their lives, and with this immediate goal of just living as long as women, because as all of you know, almost everywhere in the world, women live much longer than men. Why is that? So to help us understand, I'd like to welcome Jed to the program. Jed, thank you so much. He and his wife have 6 kids and multiple grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So Jed is a man par excellence, and has really focused his life on the empowerment of men in a very, very specific way. So Jed, I'd like to welcome you. And why don't we start with you responding in whatever way you would like to my opening remarks. And then we can just get into more details about your various ideas for the program that we're co-developing. But speak to us as deeply and as long as you would like about the challenge of being a man in our time.
Thank you, Jim. And thanks for the opportunity to be here with you and with our audience today. One little quick quote, I can't remember who authored it, but it's very powerful. It's lived with me for a long time. He said, men are violent because their souls have been violated.
Mm.
So if I could preface what I'm going to say with that idea and acknowledge that not all men are violent, clearly, this is some men, and not all men whose souls have been violated in some way become violent as a response. But those who become violent have had their souls violated. And we'll talk a bit about what that means. But I think if we can just let that reality come in, it allows us to stay out of the either accepting or believing that this is all men. This is a problem that is men who are just bad. Men are bad. You know, some people say we ought to just get rid of men. You know, the world would be better off if men would be gone. And others believe that the community of life on planet Earth would be better off if humanity were just gone. Well, I think we can do better than that. And I would offer, as at least my own introduction to this work, I got interested more than 50 years ago after the birth of my first son, Jamal. And as I held him in my hands, for the first time, tiny little baby, and looked down at him, I made a promise that I would be a different kind of father than my father was able to be for me, and to do everything I could to create a world where men were fully healed, were fully engaged with themselves, their families, and the community of life. Then I was able to be, and I wanted to pass that on to my son. And later, when my first daughter, Angela, was born in 1972, my son was born in 1969. That was really the birth of MenAlive, where I felt that I wanted to have a window to the world, if you will, to help me understand some of the questions that you were raising, like why did my father reach a point when he was midlife where he felt that he was overwhelmed with guilt and shame because he couldn't make a living to support his family. That's how it felt to him. And he felt that if he couldn't do that, if he couldn't make a living, if he couldn't be the breadwinner, then he shouldn't be here. And I think that theme, that if we don't fulfill a certain role that I've come to see as a very narrow role, some call it the man box, these beliefs that say not only are we restricted in who we can be, how we can feel, what we can put out, but that there is a certain part of men that are inherently bad, inherently awful. Some of you all remember, or if you're of the era I am, grew up with the nursery rhyme that said, it contrasted males and females. Said little girls, remember this one, were made of sugar and spice and everything nice. And little boys, on the other hand, were made of variously translated snips and snails and puppy dogs' tails. And always with that image, what happened to the puppy dogs? Why were their tails cut off? And the implication was, well, that's what boys do, because that's who we are. That's what we're made of. And I think there's reasons why that belief has gotten embedded in our culture. Because now we know that modern research, clinical research, as well as scientific research, has shown pretty substantially that the reason that we have problems in our lives, whether it's physical problems, emotional problems, relational problems, have roots that go back to our childhood. They call them adverse childhood experiences that are very common, everything from divorce to growing up in a family that was violent, to having fathers absent. I wrote one of my books is called My Distant Dad, Healing the Family Father Wound. So many men and women, boys and girls, grow up with fathers who were physically or emotionally absent, or who were in some ways wounded themselves and passed on that woundedness to their children. And so we have to ask then, in the context that you've raised some questions, below the surface of why are men so violent? Why are we doing the things that we do to others? We have to also realize that the flip side of the outward violence is inward violence. You know, suicide is the ultimate expression of a hopelessness, a feeling of not only that the world cannot be improved or I can't make it better, but somehow the world would be better off without me. And if there is a process going on somewhat universally throughout the world of men as a group becoming more violent outwardly and inwardly, we know the suicide rate, for instance, for males is 3 to 18 times, this is the US, but not so different other places, 3 to 18 times higher for males than for females. And just think about it, let that sink in a little bit. Suicide rate 3 times to 18 times higher for males than for females, and rises as we get older. I mean, we all suffer from all the diseases and all the challenges of aging, but males as a group give up, that are disconnected in some way from themselves, from the healing parts of life. And these are realities not only that we have to face, but once facing them, we can do something about. And I think that's what I'm doing, what I've discovered, what I want to share with the world and teach other people how to understand these things, so that together we can rise together and we can work together and we can change the world together.
Thank you so much, Jed. Why don't we just start with MenAlive. I would love to, before we dive into the moonshot and the program, would love to hear more about over 50 years of this organization being of service to men. Tell us the motivation to get it started. Tell us the evolution of what you've learned about the male psyche and men's health over these 50 years, because you've been in this domain very consistently for the arc, really, of the women's liberation movement. You've seen all the social changes that have happened in the United States and around the world. And all the way through that, you've been attentive to the male psyche and male health. And I think people would be very interested in hearing from you that journey.
Well, the simple part of it is, as a male, and as a male who grew up with a father who, took an overdose of sleeping pills at a certain point in his life and was committed to the state mental hospital, I grew up really wanting to understand what happened to my father. I think that's the personal part that we all have in whatever we do, that we want to know something about ourselves. So I wanted to understand what happened to my father. And below that was, what had happened to me? What is in me? I'm a male, my father's male. Is there something in me that's going to end up at a point where I will no longer want to live, or I will want to take my life? And then beyond that, how can I prevent that from happening to me, first of all? As that's how I got into the field. How can I keep it from happening to me? And then my own family, as I had children, son and daughter, and then other children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But how could I help prevent other families from going through what I went through? So that really was the impetus. And when you have children, when I had children at least, having a boy, I realized right from the beginning, was a different experience. My male child was different from my female child. They weren't just children. And they were, in fact, gendered differently just from experience. This whole idea of, well, children are totally a product of their environment. Because I believed that at the time, and I wanted my son not to be just into sports and outward and into aggression. I wanted him to be soft and gentle and caring. And I wanted my daughter to be able to be whatever she wanted to be. And if she wanted to be a professional sports person, so I tried to guide them in the kind of the reverse of what the stereotypes were. And there are a lot of stereotypes that do not hold up in terms of what's real. But there's some biological realities that I've come to understand. And so MenAlive really was my exploration place. So it was where I wrote articles a lot for myself. And then as people responded, say, oh, that was really helpful to me, for other people. And then over the course of these, more than 50 years, it's become a place where I could share my questions. I could share a community of people who were exploring together. I could house the books that I wrote. I've written, as you say, 17 books. I've written 1,000 articles over the last recent times. Before that, I didn't keep track of them, but 1,000 over the last, 15 years or so that I put out and have, found their way into the world. And it's really a place where we continue to explore together and learn together, share together, open our hearts together, be vulnerable together, and find the way in which ultimately we can create a world that is the place we all know we want to be, the place that once was and can be again, where humans were friendly with nature, weren't trying to dominate it, weren't feeling dominated by it, but we were one part of the community of life that's been going on 3.8 billion years, this community of life on planet Earth. And we want to be part of that for a long time into the future. And that means humanity needs to change some things. And I think understanding men's wounding and men's healing is perhaps a key part of that, and certainly the part that has grabbed my attention and will continue through the rest of my life at least.
So, I mean, over these 50 years, Jed, you know, we've all seen the arc of women's liberation and the extraordinary empowerment that's come to women and girls. A lot less focus has been on whatever arc there has been in terms of the male journey. So as you look back 50 years and then juxtapose where men have come today, have you seen men fundamentally changing at levels, for example, that women have? Do you see that men have basically stayed more or less the same? What kind of changes have you seen in the male journey over the last 50 years?
Well, again, it starts personally, like so many things do in my life, and I think all our lives. And I happen to put a lot of my personal story into my writing and into my experience, so I share it. And one of the things that was early on in my experience was that I realized that my relationships with women were problematic. I wanted a really good relationship. I wanted a different kind of relationship to the one I had with my family, or that I saw in my family growing up. And I got married early, had children early, my son and a daughter, adopted daughter. And I went through a divorce. And then I licked my wounds and figured I'd made the wrong choice of partner. And then I fell in love again and got married again. And I got divorced again. And if you go to my website, MenAlive, you'll see my introductory video and sharing. It's kind of my welcome. I'm honest. I say I want to share the confessions of a twice divorced marriage counselor. And going through divorce and a breakup is difficult for anybody and everybody. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's been through a divorce and ending of a relationship. But if you're a marriage and family counselor, it has its own kind of guilt and shame that, you know, I'm supposed to be helping others. How can I do that if I'm not even able to have my own good relationship? So I took a break. I actually dropped out of the field counseling for a short time. I became a waiter. I decided I would just go back to basics. So I thought I'd get a basic job. I was a waiter at Howard Johnson's restaurant in Mill Valley, actually, if people know the Bay Area. I worked at Howard Johnson's. And I learned some things just about myself. I went back into therapy for myself. I did a lot of reading, and I came out with, I think, a better understanding. And what that led me to is I joined a men's group. At the time, you know, when women's liberation was happening and women were coming together, I felt kind of lonely. I wanted something for me, but no men were doing that, or very few at the time. But I found a group I joined, and that group has now been meeting for 53 years. And it was the core of what I learned about myself and others, and what that group started. And then I have another group that's been meeting now for 43 years, that's continuing. And my wife, who now, my third marriage with Carlin, she and I have been together now for 42 years. And she says a lot of the reason that we have a really great 42-year marriage is I've been in this particular men's group for 43 years. So I see that trend now, which was very small back 42 years ago. Not very many people were focused on men. Men were seemingly not that interested, although I think we were interested then. We just didn't know how to do it, to come together in groups And now there are groups all over the world. One of my books called 12 Rules for Good Men. The first rule or the first guidance that I think helps is men coming together in groups like these, where we can talk, we can be vulnerable, we can tell our truth, we can feel safe with other men, as I have come to see with the men's group I'm in. And to start the dialogue, to start talking about the hazards of being male, the problems, not that we're just talking about how can we be the alpha male or the number one man. Often that is a cover for our weakness, our vulnerability that we're afraid to share, because so many of us have grown up with sports adages. I was into sports, with the Red Grange was kind of the famous coach from UCLA who said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. And that's kind of transferred through the sports world and into men's psyche in some way that has kept us from being able to be the whole people that we are. So that's really the beginning, and it's reached, I think, peak potential now, where these ideas, I think, are starting an exponential growth, where people are starting to come together to say, not to neglect. There's still a lot of work that needs to happen in healing the world of women, and to be able to, make our apologies, to own our part in this. But we don't need to do one or the other. In fact, they're intimately related. I did a training program. I was invited to be part of a high school training program. It started out for girls to come together and support and empower girls. And one of the things that came out of the girls talking was that they said the number one thing that they thought would help these girls in high school have a better start, a better beginning into the world of adulthood, is if we did something for males. Get the boys, if you could help get the boys get their shit together, so to speak, this would really help the girls. This was their quote. So then we started a group for boys and started a whole program in the high school to complement what was being done for and with girls. So these two parallel paths of healing men, healing women, and together healing our relationships is part of that larger picture of healing not only our relationships to ourselves, each other, but healing our relationship to the planet that we all share.
Beautifully put. Art Mitchell has put in a quote from Bell Hooks that is just to this point that I'd love to have you respond to. He says, Bell Hooks says, we need to highlight the role women play in perpetuating and sustaining patriarchal culture, so that we will recognize patriarchy as a system women and men support equally, even if men receive more rewards from that system. Dismantling and changing patriarchal culture is work that men and women must do together. That's from her book, The Will to Change: Men, Masculinity, and Love. So speak to us about that observation by Bell Hooks.
Well, Bell Hooks is one of my heroes. What I learned early on was that, a lot of the wisdom coming out of the gender issues that were happening in the 60s and 70s when I got started were from women. And so I early on felt that the women's liberation was my liberation. I went to feminist bookstores to read, people like Bell Hooks. So I think it speaks to the recognition clearly of a, very understanding and a very powerful woman of the connection and the things that are wounding all of us. And one of my colleagues that I've been working with for more than 30 years, Rianne Eisler, who wrote The Chalice and the Blade and many other books. And Rianne had a very interesting view. She said, that she had a different conception that I like and I use about the two paths that the world is on, two contrasting systems that she called the domination system and the partnership system. And so rather than call what some have called the patriarchy, she uses the domination system, which I find is less putting on male, the patriarchy. I think we understand what that is, but it covers over some deeper truths about the domination system, which, in my writing and my books, I talk about goes back 6,000 years, not just to the dawn of when we think of city-states, and some say civilization was where we got off track when we moved from hunter-gatherer culture, but a certain way of being in the world that had to do with domination. And some other colleagues of mine have done studies of what happened back 6,000 years ago. And James DeMayo did some very interesting research that indicated that there was environmental crisis that happened in the Middle East, of not man-made environmental change, but generations of drought that caused, people to die, families to die, and a feeling then of disconnection from, up until then, that feeling that the earth would provide, that the spirits of the earth. So this very long period in the Middle East of drought and famine, many believe then was the beginning of that armoring that had to happen, and that males, that was kind of the beginning of the domination culture that spread in some ways throughout the world. So I think all of this together can help us understand what the origins of this problem that now we're living with, an aspect of it, the domination. But as Rianne says, there's also a very long history, a longer history of partnership that I think we can reclaim, reimagine, and I think a lot of it's going to be triggered and hopefully supported by men doing our part, so that we can join the women that are doing their part to make the changes that we all know need to be made.
Well, let's deepen that and then transition to your current project, which I'm thrilled to be participating in with you and Ubiquity University. Tell us about the moonshot for men that you've been galvanizing over the last year or two, because this is really the culmination of your life's work in a very, very fundamental way. And so for the balance of the time, let's talk about this moonshot. What do you mean by a moonshot for men?
Well, let me give you a little background about how this started. As we talked, MenAlive has been going, since my first son was born. So November 21st, 1969 was kind of where I placed that beginning. And then my daughter's birth in 1972 and the actual starting of MenAlive and the website. And I tried to orient what I knew about how to heal myself and others. And then I read a research study that in a way just totally shocked me. And it felt like a call to action. Two colleagues, Randall Nessie is an MD, who's a friend I got to know at conferences on evolutionary psychology and evolutionary trends in the world. And he and his colleague Daniel Kruger did a study of cultures throughout the world. And they studied 20 different cultures and countries. And what they found, they were interested in understanding how men and women lived their lives and what would be the factors that would allow for a good, healthy, long life. And one of their findings was that in every culture they studied, they found that men died sooner. And I think that's common sense. We kind of know that. And they also live sicker. They get more of the major disease killers, heart disease, cancer, at higher rates than women. And those are the things that eventually kill us. And their conclusions were, for me, the call to action. They hoped that once these findings were put out, that governments and organizations would jump on this and start to make these kind of changes. And what they found was that if you could simply help men live as long and healthy lives as women, and there are things we now know that you can do. They said that you would save 375,000 men's lives every year in the United States alone. So let that sink in a little bit. 375,000 men's lives every year in the United States alone. So think about, we all have fathers, grandfathers, men we know who died before their time. And we all know women who often are carrying on with a wounded, this was, friends I've seen. What would it be like if those men didn't die, if they lived a full life and you could live? And there's reasons maybe why we can't get the whole way, because there's some biological things that maybe are more difficult to change, but we can do a lot. So 375,000 men's lives every year in the US alone. And their bottom line conclusion said, if we could do that, we would do more good in the world than curing cancer. So I think curing cancer, that would be a good thing. Everybody says, yeah, man, if we could do that, and everybody's got their own if we could do that, man. And we can do this. And the moonshot idea really came from Google. I have a colleague who was one of the main people at what's called Google X. And Google X is the division within Google that does big projects. They look for things that they can impact with not an incremental change, a 10% improvement in something. They want a 10x improvement, 10 times. And it's called their moonshot factory. That's the common name within Google for Google X. They call it their moonshot factory. And in my mind, going to the moon was a big deal. But if I think of what would have an impact on humanity and on life on planet Earth, getting men to the moon, I think, pales in comparison to what it would be like if we could live peaceful lives on this planet and be able to have relationships that were healing and healthy, and men and women lived long and healthy lives. So my moonshot came together, as you said, about 2 years ago, where I recognized that I had been doing this work for all these years. I had some pretty good ideas of what worked, but I also have developed, I've been traveling all over the world. I've met colleagues. I'm guessing at this point, I'm just guessing, but I would say that there are probably 1,000 really high quality programs that in some way deal with men's health. That if we could bring these programs together, if we could, let each other know what we're doing, if we could share our findings. And around that, I would say there are millions, maybe hundreds of millions of men and their families and women who are saying, yes, if we could do this, this is something I could get behind. This isn't a division between the left and the right or the this or the that. This is something I think we can all agree on potentially. This would be a good thing. And so I brought together a small group of colleagues who I knew personally who are doing good work. We've been meeting for a year, and we have put together this idea. The actual book that you mentioned, this is it. I'll just hold it up. It's actually called Long Live Men. This is just my copy. It'll be out later this year. The subtitle is The Moonshot Mission to Heal Men, Close the Lifespan Gap, right? And Offer Hope to Humanity. So that'll be out later this year. It's part of this larger movement that we're hoping to develop, where we can get the 1,000 organizations together under hopefully a collective umbrella. We can do some training, which is why I approached you, because I think if we're really going to help, millions of men and their families, and you can't separate out men's healing from women's healing. So women are part of this. My original group that I put together have women, not just guys. So there's women, and women who believe in this are part of this. So men and women coming together. So we want to train people, and I'm hoping, we can get a training program together so that we could start it this year and really share a lot of not only the data, but the stories, the heartfelt stories that we know, if we could get in touch with them in our own hearts, in our own souls, in our own lives, we could, in fact, transform the planet. We can change the dialogue, we can change the beliefs, we can change the stories that really animate either a partnership future or a domination future. And I think we have the knowledge, and hopefully as we spread that knowledge, the skills and the actions that can move us collectively together towards the partnership future that we all want. Nobody wants to be beating each other up, blowing each other up, killing each other. But we have systems that make that more likely. And those are the systems that we can change, starting within each of us, going to the level of our relationships, and going to the level of planetary healing of the systems that either support a partnership future or a domination future. And we all want to do partnership. And now we know how to do that more. Places like your Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising and 1,000 others are doing this. Let's come together.
Beautiful, brilliant. And we'll be working a lot with Jed, everyone, over the next several months and year or two as we craft this global conversation, supporting Jed and this moonshot mission for men, simply to live as long as women, and ask the fundamental questions around, how do men do that? What do they have to understand about themselves? What do they have to change about themselves? What can they learn from women? Because women are already naturally doing it. And so we men, in addition to supporting the liberation of women, I think have got to come to the point where we see women as our mentors and as our leaders in some fundamental way, because they're living life, they're doing life better than we men are. And so this is one of the reasons why I've been so passionate about supporting what Jed is doing, because I think he's on to something with this moonshot mission that, if the world could really seize it, is one of those rare things that could change everything. Because men all over the world are suffering in similar ways. And women all over the world are doing something fundamentally better than men, that men at this moment could really learn from. So Jed, say a little bit more about the kind of training program that you envision for something of this audacity, because this is indeed a moonshot, my friend.
Well, it is indeed. And again, I'd sum it up. They're people who kind of capture the essence of something. And sometimes it's not the scientists, it's not the researchers. It can be, a poet, a comedian. Elaine Boozler is a comedian, and she offered a quote, obviously somewhat tongue in cheek, but I think it captures both an essence of the problem, and within it, part of the solution. So Elaine said, talking about women first of all, she said, when women get depressed, they eat or go shopping. Men invade another country. It's a whole different way of thinking. And obviously, you can apply that many places in the world. You can apply it to Ukraine. And one of the things, and this ties into the training about Ukraine, is that what people, I think, don't recognize, and certainly it isn't in the mainstream media, that there's a peace movement that is going on in Ukraine and all over the world that says, there's a different way we can solve the problem than, the fighting. And what we read about is the fighting and the defending and the, inevitable invasion and so on. But one aspect that, again, hasn't been talked about is the peace movement, people in Ukraine and other parts of the world saying we need to find a way to stop the killing and stop the fighting and stop the violence, even in the face of, an acting out, dictator that I think we all recognize, but understanding the causes are important. And a men's health reality that I think we all have to pay attention to is we have a family here in Willits, where I live, who their daughter had been connected on an exchange student relationship with another family in Ukraine, and now grew up, and years later, they're in Ukraine wanting to get out. And so the mother and her children are going to be arriving here in Willits shortly, and a local family will be taking them in. The father wants to come, wanted to leave Ukraine, but because he's a man, he cannot leave because there's a requirement that all men must stay in the country. Women have a choice. Some women want to stay in the country, want to fight, want to get in the army, want to take up arms. Some want to be part of the peace movement, but the men don't have a choice. So I think part of the violence that we see, part of it is, again, the system that says men must stay. They don't have a choice. We recognize choice when we talk about females often in reproductive rights, of female choice being important, but we need to recognize that there are male counterparts to that. And one of them is the choice to say, I don't want to fight. I don't want to take that choice away from me. I'd like to be able to choose. So the training that we're going to be doing really is going to start at some fundamental realities of difference between males and females. And new research is saying, for instance, you mentioned David Page, who's a very high-level researcher, biologist, medical doctor, and he has been doing genetic research for years. And he's found that, he says, there's 10 trillion cells in the human body, and every one is sex specific. And what does he mean by that? We all kind of know, basically, there's genes, there's 23 pairs. One of the pairs is the X and Y chromosome. And if you have an XY chromosome, you look like the males that are on camera, at least here. And if you have XX chromosome, you are female, biologically female, regardless of whether you're gender fluid or you have different sensibilities or the gender differences. But biologically, you are either male or female. And what he recognized is that there has been a belief worldwide that humans are 99.9% the same. And the idea was, this nonsense about if you're this ethnic group or you're that ethnic, you're different, you're inferior, No, we're 99.9% the same. That had been the scientific understanding until they started doing actual genetic testing. And what Dr. Page's lab at MIT, that's where he works, in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he found that, in fact, we are 99.9% the same if you compare two men. So I'm looking at Jim on screen and myself. You and I, genetically are 99.9% the same. However, if you compare a man and a woman, we're only 98.5% the same. Same thing, 99.9% the same if you check two women's genetics, but male and female are 1.5% different. And that difference between 0.1% and 1.5% is 15 times the difference. So genetically, males are different from females by 1.5%. I mentioned to Jim, I said, if that doesn't seem like a lot, we know that humans as a group are that different from chimpanzees. So Jim and I are as different from male chimpanzees as we are in our genetics. So the bottom line takeaway for me is that men and women not only are different genetically, but in Dr. Page's lab, and then there's the paper that Jim and I talked about that I have, which will be posted on my website over the next probably month or so, shows that the difference in cells, so 10 trillion cells, each one, if we're male, is different from females. They actually code for different proteins, that there's a whole host of diseases that we get more likely if we're female than male, or vice versa. And these are the things that we will help people understand, everything from the basic genetics to the biology, to the psychology, to relationships, to the larger issues that are different, and the things that we're the same as, that we're not different in, because we're the same in many ways. So the goal of this is to help people understand themselves so that we're not having to pretend we're different. There is I forget who made this simple and off-the-cuff quote. He says, if you're not who you is, if you ain't who you is, you're not being yourself. If you be who you is, or you be who you ain't, you gotta be yourself. And the essence of our training is, how can you be who you are biologically? And part of being biologically male is to recognize that we're biologically weaker than females. There's a biological reason why men die sooner and live sicker. A lot of that can be changed, but Sharon Mollem, which you'll see in my paper, is an MD researcher who has done research on the X chromosome. And every woman has two X's in all 10 trillion cells of her body. And it turns out having two X chromosomes allows females as a group to prevent a lot of illnesses, because if there's a problem on one X chromosome, you have another X chromosome that may have a positive benefit. For males, we only have one X chromosome and we have a Y chromosome. So everything from the biology to the psychology to the relationship, we're going to train people. And what I do as a therapist is this translates into how we can help men and women have better relationships. It can help us deal with depression in different ways. It can help us recognize that my vision is we might go to a health clinic, my wife and I, we'd go in the front door and then she'd go one way and I'd go the other way, and we'd each get gender-specific healthcare. And then we'd come back together so that I could understand what she was getting so I could support that. She could understand what I was getting to support that. And we could understand how we can both live long, healthy lives so that we, can age together, healthy, and whatever our ultimate lifespan is. I'll be 80 this year, so I'm hoping I've got another 20 years. So this is where I want to put my energy for the next 20 years, is to continuing this study and to sharing what we've learned with the world.
Brilliant, brilliant. To your point, Jed, around the X and Y chromosome differences, and reading your article, just to give people an example, and love to have you comment in terms of like rheumatoid arthritis. It's 3-to-1 women more than men have rheumatoid arthritis. On the other hand, autism is 5-to-1 men over women. And lupus, for example, the same thing. So as we explore more about these fundamental differentials between men and women, we're really realizing that 1.5 differential, and the fact that we carry the kind of the sex chromosomes in every single cell in our body, that influences, Jed is saying, everything from what proteins to kind of what diseases. We're really beginning to realize, and this is what I find so fascinating, because it wasn't until I was engaging with Jed that I even began to realize that this was even true. I'd always thought, I think most of you, that men and women are basically the same, except for our reproductive mechanics are different, and so forth and so on. But the difference between the male and female is a fundamental difference at every level, and that's what makes it so challenging. But that's what makes it so exuberantly wonderful as well. So to have the men and women truly begin to understand that women aren't the weaker sex, as has been thought for 6,000 years. Men are. Just think of what that will change in our head.
Is that we've had to pretend because we've had trouble acknowledging our weaknesses. So we have to pretend to be strong, and that pretending is what, in extension, within a dominator culture, ends up with strongmen dictators that are, such prevalent, throughout the world. And that's what we need to change. So you're right on with that, Jim.
Yeah. And so your book comes out in is it May?
Probably be May or June. We're going to probably have a big release around Father's Day weekend and the week before Father's Day. So the book will be available. There'll be classes. The whole Moonshot group that I've been organizing will have some information. You and I talked about having some introduction to the training that we'll be doing later this year, so people can learn about it, sign up for it, be part of it, because it's for all of us. It isn't just me training. This is going to be, I will have guest experts that will be coming in who I've been working with. So it won't just be me. There'll be the best people in the world will be sharing their own experiences, and together, because we are going to learn from each other, we will all be focused on how can we learn and how can we heal and how can we create the world that we know we all want and want for our children and grandchildren and my 2 great-grandchildren that I have now, and hopefully we'll have more of that lineage as the children and grandchildren continue to do their part to do their lives together.
Well, thank you, Jed. This has been an amazing dialogue, and we'll keep everybody posted on the developments, because we believe tackling the issue of being a man in the 21st century is a critical challenge, and we have to tackle it at the level of a moonshot. And we know it can be done. We just have to be able to think big enough and work collaboratively, globally enough to bring in, those 1,000 organizations and a whole new transformation of global consciousness. So thank you, Jed. And as we close, what would just give us from your life, nearly 80 years old now, what would you say to men that are listening to this broadcast about who they need to be and what kind of challenges they need to take on and how they can begin to participate in this moonshot?
Well, I think, as I said, the core is being able to acknowledge our vulnerability, acknowledge our weakness, acknowledge that we don't want to keep having to carry the demand that we be something other than who we are. And I think part of the whole women's movement has been that for women to say, there's more to life than the roles that the society has told us is who we are. And I think men are starting to recognize that, but it means we need to be in a safe place to talk about it. That's why in my book, 12 Rules for Good Men, the first rule is join a men's group. It's why my wife says that part of the reason we've had such a great 42-year marriage is because I've been in a men's group for 43 years. So I'm actually going to be putting on a retreat in March for men who, it's the first one I've done in a number of years, to allow for a small group of men to work with me and some colleagues around our own healing relationships. So I think we find those groups in different ways. Fortunately, there are a lot more groups. Some of them are online, some of them meet in person, but being able to do what men have done for millions of years, when we were hunter-gatherers, part of the hunt was men often went out in groups of men. And part of the goal was to bring back some food for the community, just as women went out often in groups to gather, and some hunted and some gathered and so on. But the essence of it was men had men's groups to be with other guys. And you weren't just hunting, you were talking, you were sharing, you're talking about the problems you're having with your family, your wife, you weren't getting along. You could be yourself. And that's, I think, really the essence of what this is going to be, a community where men can be with other men to be themselves. My wife and I'm in a men's group. She's in a women's group. We're in a group where men and women come together. So all of these ways in which we can acknowledge and celebrate the essence of being male, if we're male, those 10 trillion cells in my body, every one of them is male. And same thing in women. So celebrate who we are, celebrate our differences, celebrate the fact that we're part of humanity, and celebrate the fact that we're also part of the family of life on Earth, not just the human reality, but we're mammals, all of us, celebrating our mammalian connection. We also are part of this whole lineage of life. When I wrote the book, 12 Rules for Good Men, I wanted to know, where did maleness start? How far back in the evolutionary history were there two different cells, a male and a female? Well, it turns out it's 1 billion years. So there have been male cells, think of sperm and egg on the planet for 1 billion years. So we have not only a male heritage, thinking about my father and my grandfather and all the way back through our human heritage, we have a male heritage that goes back 1 billion years, as do females. Actually, their heritage goes back even farther, because at least the biologists tell us that before there were male, female, there were kind of a unisex, and they split into two sister cells. that's what they called them. I don't know if they were really gendered. But my point is, we have a very long history of the beauty, the dance of male and female, the energetic dance that has been going on for a long time, that we all have an opportunity to dance together and to celebrate together.
Jed Diamond, everyone, one of the great sages of our time, who's put his life and creative intelligence to develop a moonshot for men, which, if accomplished with the elegance with which we went to the moon, would radically transform human life on this earth right at the moment where nothing less will suffice to save us. So, Jed, thank you so much. Look forward to working with you, and we'll be talking a lot more about this over the next couple of months, and we'll be launching a program with MenAlive here at Ubiquity University. So this was just an hors d'oeuvre of what is to come with one of the great men leaders of our time. So, Jed, thank you so much. That'll bring our conversation to a close for today. Everyone, you're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link that Stan has put in the chat box. And then next week, we're going to turn our attention to the apologies that we need to make to the earth. It's one thing, the apologies we need to make with each other, but the apologies that all of us need to make to the earth. And we're going to look at the issue of the glyphosates, the poisons that are now omnipresent around the planetary ecology. So that'll be next week. Thank you so much. See you in the after chat. Bye for now. Thanks so much, Jed. This was brilliant. Well done.